My name is Martha Weller. I'm 78 years old, and I've lived a life full of service, sacrifice, and second chances. I was a nurse for over 40 years, married to a soft-spoken mechanic named Walter, and raised 2 children who I believed would honor me in my old age. But nothing could have prepared me for the morning I woke up and found my bedroom turned into their laundry room. Not shared with, not politely used in my absence. I woke up with detergent bottles stacked where my books once sat. My reading lamp was gone, replaced by a rusted ironing board. Piles of damp, smelly clothes surrounded my bed, and someone had taken down my curtains and hung up wet bedsheets to dry. A dryer sat humming where my rocking chair used to be. And the worst part, no one told me. I sat up in confusion, the morning sun creeping in through the cloth-stained window. My bones ached, but not half as much as my heart when I realized what they'd done. No knocking, no conversation, no explanation. I was just an old woman they didn't bother to consult anymore. And right there in that moment, sitting in the middle of my own bed, surrounded by their underwear and towels, I decided to make a move none of them would ever expect. Because what they didn't know was that I still had Walter's savings account. The one he never told them about. The one I quietly grew over decades. And just last week, when I overheard them whispering about refinancing the mortgage, I had taken a bus downtown and made a quiet phone call. I had bought their mortgage. Bought it. They didn't know yet. But they were about to. And that dryer humming in my room. It would be the last cycle they'd ever run in my presence. Let me take you back. Back to the beginning when I thought moving in with my son and his wife would be a blessing, not a curse. It started just after Walter passed. We'd been together for 50 years. Losing him was like losing half of myself. I'd grown used to the sound of his breath at night, the shuffle of his steps across the kitchen floor when he made his morning coffee, and the soft hum of his off-key whistling when he worked on old lawnmowers in the garage. When that silence came, it was unbearable. My daughter, Penny, lived in Alaska. Too far. My son, David, lived right here in Georgia with his wife, Michelle, and their 2 boys. They offered to take me in. I thought it was kindness. I thought finally I wouldn't be so alone. Oh, how wrong I was. First, things seemed fine. I had a room at the back of the house. It was small but cozy enough. Michelle helped decorate it with a few of my photo frames and gave me a corner for my books. David was always working, but he'd poke his head in to check on me. The boys were noisy but sweet. But as weeks turned to months, the warmth faded. Michelle started locking up the snacks in the kitchen. The boys stopped visiting my room unless they were looking for something. David. He hardly said more than 10 words a day to me. Still I said nothing. I told myself it was adjustment. I told myself it was grief. But then came the little humiliations. One day I walked into the living room and they hushed their voices. Michelle held up my slippers in front of David and laughed. These things are older than your childhood. Another time I heard her telling the boys not to touch my things because Grandma's stuff smells like old furniture. Stung. But I stayed silent. Because silence, I thought, was the price of peace. Then came the schedule. Michelle pinned it on the fridge. Laundry days, meal rotations, cleaning duties. I had been assigned Tuesday dinner and Sunday folding. Didn't feel like family anymore. Felt like a boarding house. But nothing prepared me for the day they emptied the garage and dumped their storage bins into my room. That was a week before the laundry incident. I'd gone to church, and when I came back my rocking chair was gone. Michelle said it was too bulky, and they needed space for seasonal items. I stared at her in disbelief, but David just muttered, "It's only temporary, Mom. Don't be difficult. Don't be difficult." Those 3 words dug into my chest like a rusted nail. I stayed up that night. I didn't sleep. And at 3 a.m., I opened the little wooden box where I kept the savings Walter left behind. They didn't know about it. No one did. Walter had always said, "This is our security, Martha. One day, you may need to stand on your own." I had laughed then. But now it was prophecy. The next day I took a bus to the city. I wore my best blue coat and my church shoes. I held Walter's papers close to my chest, and I walked into the bank. I was trembling but determined. "Ma'am," the banker said, "are you aware of the offer you're making?" He nodded. "I'm not here for favors. I'm here to buy the mortgage on 42 Heather Lane." "Their mortgage? My home?" He blinked. "Do you want them notified?" I looked him straight in the eye and smiled. "Not yet. Let them laugh now. Let them mock my slippers and use my room for their laundry. They didn't know that the house they called theirs now answered to me. But the day of reckoning was coming. And it started with a knock on the front door. To be continued. If this story grabbed your heart, made you feel something real, or reminded you that quiet strength always rises, please like, comment, and subscribe. Don't miss the next chapter. The knock on the front door echoed through the house like a warning bell. It was a crisp Thursday morning. Michelle was in the kitchen blending one of her endless kale smoothies. David had just stepped out of the shower, and the boys were upstairs, fighting over who got the game controller first. The house was its usual chaotic self. But I heard the knock. 2 beats. Then silence. Michelle grumbled and wiped her hands on her apron. "Can someone get that?" she called, not even looking toward the hallway. I was already up. Already dressed. Already waiting. I walked slowly, deliberately, down the hallway, my slippers brushing the wooden floor. The house smelled like bleach and overcooked bacon. And somewhere behind the noise and clutter, I could hear my heart drumming in my chest. Because I knew who was at that door. And I knew what they brought with them. When I opened it, the man standing there tipped his hat politely. He was in a charcoal gray suit, with a leather briefcase in one hand. "Mrs. Weller?" he asked. He nodded. "Yes. Come in." Michelle peeked her head from the kitchen. "Who's that?" "Just someone I invited," I said calmly. The man stepped in and handed me a file. "Here are the finalized documents. The mortgage transfer is complete. You're now the primary lien holder." Michelle froze. "Wait, what?" I turned to her slowly. "I bought the house." Her face lost all its color. You what?" David rushed downstairs half-dressed, still towel-drying his hair. "Mom, what's going on?" I didn't answer right away. I let the silence hang in the air. Let them squirm. Let them wonder. Then I said it, softly but clearly. "This house belongs to me now." Michelle sputtered. "That's not possible. You're retired. You don't have that kind of money." I looked her dead in the eyes. "You didn't think I had value, Michelle. You thought I was just old bones taking up space. But I've been planning, listening, waiting." David opened the folder, flipping through pages like they might disappear. His hands trembled. "I'm not here to throw you out," I added. "At least not today. But things will change." And just like that, I turned and walked back to what used to be my bedroom. The room that still smelled faintly of dryer sheets and mildew. I sat down on the edge of my bed and took a deep breath. I'd fired the first shot. But the war was just beginning. Let me take you back a bit so you understand what led up to that knock on the door. 3 months before the laundry incident, I had my first hint that something was wrong, when Michelle asked me to start using the side bathroom. "Just so the boys can use the main one," she said sweetly. I didn't argue. I nodded and smiled. But the side bathroom had no mirror. The toilet seat wobbled. And the bulb above the sink flickered like a dying star. Then came the grocery changes. One day I found a sticky note on the fridge. "Do not eat the almond milk, it's for Michelle only." Another one a week later. "Grandma, no more snacks after 8 p.m. Boys are complaining." Then came the moment that really stuck in my gut. I'd cooked dinner one evening. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and green beans. Michelle walked in, looked at the food, and said, "That smells too greasy. We're trying to stay lean. The kids will just have cereal tonight." Cereal. Over my home-cooked meal. The boys didn't even look at me when they poured their bowls. I cleaned the table that night with tears in my eyes, pretending my back was just sore. But the pain wasn't in my spine. It was in my spirit. Each little act chipped away at me. And I stayed quiet. Until the night I overheard them talking in the garage. Michelle's voice loud and frustrated. "We can't keep paying this mortgage on David's salary alone. I told you your mom could have gone to a facility. We would have had more space and less bills." Froze. Facility. More space. Less bills. David didn't defend me. He just said, "We'll figure something out." I walked back to my room that night and pulled Walter's box from under the bed. In it were old letters, retirement certificates, and a small notebook with passwords to our joint investment account. Walter had started saving in 1984. Small amounts. But over time, with patience, the pot had grown. I stayed up all night crunching the numbers. And realized I had enough. More than enough. Enough to buy the house outright. Could have told them. Could have bragged. But that would have given away the power. Instead, I played their game. When they took over my closet space for Michelle's yoga gear, I smiled. When David forgot to wish me a happy birthday, I nodded and said nothing. When the laundry room incident happened, I simply stood up and went to the bank. And now, 3 days after that knock on the door, I sat in the kitchen while Michelle quietly handed me a plate of toast. No kale smoothie this time. No sticky notes. Just silence. And tension so thick you could spread it like jam. But it wasn't over. Because that evening I found something under my bed. A voice recorder. Still blinking red. They were spying on me. To be continued. If you felt that twist coming or didn't, and this story is making your heart race just a little, go ahead and hit like, drop a comment and subscribe. Because what happens in the next chapter will make you question who really holds the power in a family. The blinking red light didn't lie. It pulsed steadily from the tiny voice recorder I found tucked under my bed, taped crudely to the underside of the frame like I wouldn't notice. But I did. And when I picked it up, my hand trembled. Not with fear, but with something sharper. Betrayal. I stared at the device in my palm, trying to understand why my own son, or his wife, would feel the need to spy on me. What were they hoping to hear? Me talking to myself. Me praying quietly at night for the strength to survive one more day in this house. Was my grief entertainment to them? I slipped the recorder into the pocket of my cardigan, stood up calmly, and walked back into the kitchen. Michelle was at the sink, rinsing a wine glass. David sat at the table staring into his phone like it held the answers to a better life. Anyone lose this? Yes. I set the recorder on the table like it was a bomb. 'Cause to me it was. Michelle turned slowly. Her eyes widened for just a second before she tried to play it cool. "What's that?" David looked up. "Where did you find that?" "Under my bed," I said plainly. "Still recording." David stood up abruptly. "It's not what it looks like, Mom." "Oh." I tilted my head. "It looks like someone wanted to eavesdrop. Maybe hoping I'd say something incriminating. Like what? Complaining about the house you both treat like your little kingdom." Michelle wiped her hands. "You've been acting secretive. Taking calls. Going out without saying where. We were just being cautious." "Cautious?" I repeated, almost laughing. "You turned my room into your laundry. You took my space. My privacy. And now you want to claim caution." David softened his tone. "Mom, you blindsided us. Buying the mortgage. That affects our finances. We didn't know how to handle it." I stared at him. "My son. My own flesh and blood. I raised you better than this, David." He lowered his head. "But Michelle." She stepped forward. "Let's not turn this into a scene," she said. "We all live here. Maybe it's time we set some boundaries." "Boundaries?" He nodded. "You're right. Let's." That night, I typed a letter and printed 3 copies. By morning, they were on the kitchen table. One for David, one for Michelle, and one for the boys' notice board. House rules. As decreed by the new owner. My bedroom is off limits. No more laundry, no more storage, no more intrusions. Meals are shared, not dictated. I will cook twice a week. And anyone who refuses will do their own dishes for a week. No eavesdropping, no spying. If found, you'll be reported to the police. Mortgage payments will be collected monthly, through me. Late fees apply. Any future disrespect will be met with a formal eviction. Michelle laughed when she read it. You're kidding, right? I looked at her without blinking. I've never been more serious. David rubbed his face. Mom, we're family. And family doesn't treat each other like staff, I replied. They didn't argue after that. Not to my face anyway. But that's when the Cold War began. It was in the silence. The stiff smiles. The dinners where only the boys said thank you. The nights I'd find the thermostat turned down just low enough to chill my bones. The groceries that suddenly stopped including my favorite cereal. The missing sugar canister. Little things. Petty things. But I noticed every single one. They thought they could wear me down. They didn't know I'd been through worse. Growing up in rural Alabama, I'd survived winters with nothing but hand-me-down coats and soup made from bones and onions. I'd faced racism in hospitals as a black nurse in the 60s. I'd stayed strong when Walter was laid off, when our roof caved in during a storm, when my first pregnancy ended in heartbreak. And now they thought almond milk and thermostat games would break me. Please. But even strength has its limits. One night, I walked into the living room and saw the boys huddled on the couch. They were playing video games as usual. But when I greeted them, neither one responded. Hello, darlings, I said again. Silence. Am I invisible now? Still nothing. Until one muttered under his breath. Dad said we shouldn't talk to you when you're in a mood. Hit like a slap. I went back to my room, shut the door, and cried for the first time in weeks. Not because I was sad. 'Cause I was angry. And tired. And more determined than ever to make sure they never ever controlled me again. That's when I decided to go one step further. I went back to the bank. Opened a trust. A living trust in my name, with full ownership of the house transferred under it. And a clause that should I pass, the property would not revert to David or Michelle. It would go to a community shelter for homeless senior citizens in Atlanta. Every penny of equity, every room, gone from their hands forever. They had no idea what I was doing. And I smiled every time I passed them in the hallway, pretending to be the same quiet old lady they thought I was. Until one evening, I overheard Michelle whispering on the phone. She's up to something. Can feel it. If we don't act soon, we're going to lose this house. I'm telling you, we need to push her out. Push me out. My hands gripped the doorframe as I listened. And for the first time in my life, I considered fighting fire with fire. To be continued. If you're rooting for Grandma to win this quiet war, don't stop now, like, comment and subscribe. Next chapter is where the game turns dangerous. And emotional. You don't want to miss what happens next. The word push her out stuck in my head like a splinter. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Michelle's voice. Not raised, not angry, but cold, calculated. Like someone planning a business move. Not a woman talking about her elderly mother-in-law. That's what chilled me the most. They weren't just being unkind anymore. They were planning something. I didn't know what they meant by push her out. Were they going to try to declare me mentally unfit? Were they working on some legal maneuver? Or worse, were they going to try to make my life so unbearable I'd walk out of this house on my own? Well, they were in for a surprise. Because I had no intention of leaving. Not until I was ready. Not until I had shown them that age does not mean weakness. That silence is not surrender. That old women carry more fire in their bones than the young will ever understand. Still, I needed help. Someone who understood the law better than I did. So I called Nancy. Nancy and I had gone to nursing school together back in '66. She had a feisty spirit, a sharp tongue, and the kind of brain that could untangle knots. She'd gone on to become a hospital administrator, then a consultant, and eventually, after a late-in-life law degree, an advocate for elder rights. We hadn't spoken in years. But when she answered the phone and I explained everything, she didn't hesitate. I'm coming down this weekend, she said. You don't move. Don't even flinch. We'll fix this. And just like that, I didn't feel alone anymore. While I waited, things inside the house got colder. Not just the thermostat, though yes, they were turning it down at night to ridiculous levels. I'd taken to sleeping in 2 cardigans and a knit cap. But colder in the way the boys no longer made eye contact. In how David only spoke when Michelle wasn't around. In how Michelle herself began making thinly veiled comments. You really should think about other options, Martha. A retirement home might give you more structure. I smiled sweetly. Oh, I've got structure. It's called owning the roof over your head. But even I knew the tension was reaching a breaking point. When Nancy arrived on Saturday, she walked in with her briefcase like a general arriving at the front lines. She hugged me tightly, looked around and muttered, "This place smells like fake peace." We spent the afternoon in my room going over the trust, the mortgage and the terms. Nancy was impressed. "You've got them exactly where you want them. But now we're going to make it airtight." That night we drafted an addendum. Any attempts to displace or harass me would be considered a violation of tenancy and subject to legal action. Nancy added a clause about emotional abuse, citing elder protection laws. The next morning we served them. Over pancakes. Nancy laid the papers neatly on the breakfast table while David was pouring syrup. Michelle took one look at the document and stood up. "This is insane. She's weaponizing her age." Nancy leaned back, sipping her coffee. "No. She's protecting her dignity. And I'd watch my tone if I were you. This isn't the 50s. Elder abuse is a felony in Georgia." David's hands were shaking. "Michelle, maybe we should just—" "Don't you dare," she snapped. "She's bluffing." "You're bluffing." Nancy smiled. "Try me." It was the first time I saw Michelle truly rattled. And I wish I could tell you things got better after that. But they didn't. They got worse. The boys began avoiding me completely. Michelle stopped cooking anything I could eat. David barely came out of his room. The house felt like a prison, but not for them. For me. And yet, I didn't leave. Because I had something more powerful than they ever expected. And knowledge. And quiet, burning resolve. But then one morning I woke up and found my cane missing. I searched everywhere. Under the bed, behind the door, even in the bathroom. Nothing. When I hobbled out into the hallway, I asked Michelle if she'd seen it. She smiled faintly. "Oh, you mean that old stick? I think the boys were playing sword fight with it yesterday. It might have ended up in the trash." "My cane. The one Walter carved for me with his own hands before his arthritis took over. My last physical connection to him." Something inside me cracked. Not like breaking. Like splitting open. Michelle thought she was winning. But she didn't know what I had planned next. Because Nancy wasn't just here for tea and papers. She had filed an official notice. Within 48 hours, David and Michelle would receive a summons. To appear in court. Because I was evicting them. Yes, my own son and his wife. I know that sounds cruel. But they had turned my refuge into a battlefield. And I would not die fighting in someone else's war. Especially not in my own house. To be continued. If you're still with me, you know this isn't just a story about a grandma. It's about every person who's ever been made to feel invisible. Like, comment, and subscribe to see how I turn this quiet pain into the loudest justice yet. Next chapter is coming, and trust me, it changes everything. The morning I handed them the eviction notice, the house went so silent you could hear the refrigerator hum all the way from the living room. Michelle was seated at the table, buttering toast like nothing was wrong. David had just come down the stairs, tying his tie, rushing like always. I placed the crisp white envelope on the table between them. No drama, no theatrics. "What's this?" David asked, reaching for it casually. Michelle narrowed her eyes. "More of your rules." I said nothing. Until David ripped open the envelope. I watched his face change. From relaxed to confused to stunned. He blinked, then looked up at me like I'd grown horns. This is a legal notice." "Yes," I said calmly. "A formal eviction." Michelle dropped her knife. "You're throwing us out." "I'm asking you to leave," I corrected. There's a difference. I'm giving you 30 days to find another place. I'm not dragging you to the curb. I'm giving you the courtesy you denied me." David shook his head, speechless. Michelle stood up abruptly, shoving her chair back with a screech. "You're insane, Martha." "No, dear," I said. "I've just had enough." "You're old," she shouted, pointing a finger at me. "You don't need a house this size. You don't even need this many rooms. We're the ones raising a family. And I raised mine with respect and sacrifice. What you're doing isn't raising, it's entitlement." She opened her mouth to fire back, but David stepped between us. Let's all calm down." But calm had left me a long time ago. I turned and walked back to my room, shutting the door softly behind me. And for the first time in weeks I exhaled. That night the shouting started. Not at me, but between them. I couldn't hear everything, but I caught pieces. "You told me she'd give up. She's tougher than we thought. What are we going to do now?" I curled into my blanket, staring at the ceiling, remembering the woman I used to be. The one who sat quietly, avoided conflict, and swallowed every insult with a smile. That woman was gone. The new me didn't yell. She served papers. Still, a part of me mourned. This wasn't what I wanted. I had imagined growing old in the company of my grandchildren, teaching them to bake Walter's banana bread, sharing stories from my nursing days, passing down memories. I wanted laughter and warmth, not cold wars and eviction notices. But they chose this. They pushed. And now I was pushing back. The next few days were tense. Michelle started leaving the house early and coming back late. The boys no longer greeted me. David walked around like a ghost, his eyes tired, his shoulders sagging. Then came the final blow. I received a call from the school principal. My youngest grandson, Tyler, had been caught stealing another boy's lunch. When I went to pick him up, he wouldn't even look at me. I sat with him in the car, watching him fiddle with the zipper on his backpack. "Why'd you do it, baby?" he asked. He shrugged. "Mom said we didn't have money for snacks this week. And I was hungry." That night, I made a big pot of stew and sat the boys down at the table. No Michelle. No David. Just us. I fed them like I used to feed their father. Wiped their mouths. Patted their heads. Told them stories until they smiled. And that's when it hit me. This house wasn't just brick and wood. It was history. And future. And I wasn't just reclaiming space. I was protecting it. That weekend the court letter came. Hearing was set in 3 weeks. David sat me down. He looked smaller somehow. Like the boy I used to rock to sleep after nightmares. "Mom," he said, his voice cracking. "Don't do this. Please. The boys, they need this house." I met his eyes. "And I needed your respect." He broke. Cried for the first time since Walter died. Tears ran down his cheeks as he whispered, "I was just trying to hold everything together." "No," I said gently. "You let her pull everything apart." He left my room without another word. Later that night, I found a letter slipped under my door. It was from Michelle. Short. Cold. "Fine. We'll leave. I hope you enjoy the silence." I folded the letter carefully and placed it in my drawer. Because silence wasn't my enemy. Loneliness wasn't my fear. I had already lived through worse. What I wanted now was peace. And I was willing to fight for it. But 3 days before the court hearing I got a knock on the door. Not from David. Not from Michelle. But from a lawyer. One I didn't recognize. He handed me a file. And when I opened it, I saw something that made my hands tremble. Michelle and David had filed a counterclaim, stating I was mentally unstable and unfit to manage the property. They wanted me declared incompetent. I felt the blood drain from my face. This wasn't over. They weren't leaving quietly. They wanted to take everything, even my mind. To be continued. If this story has you holding your breath, you're not alone. The battle lines are drawn, and next chapter will show you what it really means to fight for your dignity. Please like, comment, and subscribe to keep walking this road with me. Because Grandma's just getting started. I stared at the file in my lap, my fingers stiff and trembling around the edges. The words on the first page blurred, but I'd read enough. Michelle and David were challenging my competence. They'd filed an emergency petition claiming I was mentally unfit to manage my affairs, citing erratic behavior and potential cognitive decline. They wanted control of my home, my assets, my life. They were trying to declare me incompetent. I felt like the floor had cracked open beneath me. Was this what it had come to? I'd lived a life of service, spent years working night shifts in hospital wards, tending to strangers with nothing but a tired back and steady hands. I'd raised David with everything I had, poured my soul into motherhood, and now he was handing me over to the system like I was an overdue bill he didn't want to pay. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there, stunned, as the lawyer quietly left the porch without another word. That evening I called Nancy again. I didn't even say hello. Just, they're trying to put me away. She gasped. What? On what grounds? I told her everything, read the entire petition word for word. There was a silence on the other end of the line. Then that fire in her voice returned. Martha, she said, we're going to destroy this. The next morning, Nancy showed up with files, case law printouts, and a retired neurologist named Dr. Gray who agreed to run a full assessment on me. Voluntarily. I passed every cognitive test they gave me. Memory, coordination, problem-solving, orientation. I passed it all like I was back in school. You've got a sharper mind than most people half your age, Dr. Gray chuckled. Nancy patted my hand. We're going to walk into that courtroom with ironclad proof. But I want you to be ready. Ready for what? For them to lie. For Michelle to get on that stand and cry. For David to pretend this was all out of love. They will weaponize every quiet moment you ever had in this house. He nodded. Let them. I've been silent long enough. In the days that followed, I started documenting everything. Photographing how they left me out of meals, how they turned down the heat, how my belongings were slowly disappearing. I even found my cane, hidden behind the dryer. I recorded their conversations through the thin walls. Michelle calling me the old bat. David muttering, she doesn't even know what year it is, when he thought I was asleep. Nancy compiled it all. By the time we walked into the courtroom 2 weeks later, I didn't feel like a fragile old woman anymore. Felt like a soldier. The courtroom was small, humble. A single fan buzzed softly from the ceiling. Michelle showed up in a tight black dress with fake tears waiting behind her eyes. David wore a suit too big for him, like he was pretending to be a man with principles. The judge was a middle-aged woman named Claire Duval. Stern eyes. No patience for theatrics. Mr. and Mrs. Weller, she said, flipping through the petition. You're requesting guardianship over your mother based on suspected cognitive decline. Is that correct? Michelle stood. Yes, Your Honor. She's been acting erratically. Locking herself in rooms. Making large financial decisions without telling anyone. We're worried for her safety. The judge turned to me. And how do you respond, Mrs. Weller? I stood. Straighten my back. I respond with documentation, expert evaluation, and the truth. Nancy stepped forward and presented Dr. Gray's report. Then came the photos. The letters. The recordings. One by one, they built a wall of truth so high, Michelle couldn't climb it even with all her crocodile tears. When we played the audio of Michelle laughing about hiding my cane, the courtroom went still. Even David's eyes dropped to the floor. Judge Duval sighed. I've seen many guardianship cases, but it's clear Mrs. Weller is more than capable of managing her own affairs. In fact, based on this evidence, I'm referring this case to the district attorney for review of possible elder abuse. Michelle gasped. You're turning this around on us. The judge looked her dead in the eye. You weaponized the system to try to steal from someone who trusted you. I won't allow that. She banged the gavel. Petition denied. And just like that I was free. But I wasn't done. Outside the courtroom, as Michelle and David stormed off in separate directions, I turned to Nancy. I want to finish this. She nodded. Let's serve them the final notice. 2 days later, I handed David and Michelle each an envelope. Inside were formal eviction orders. Not just for the house but from my life. They had 30 days to pack up and go. There would be no more second chances. That night, David knocked on my door. His eyes were bloodshot. "Mom, are you really doing this?" I looked up from my knitting. "Yes." He swallowed hard. "Where are we supposed to go?" I stared at him. "Did you ask me that when you turned my room into a laundry? When you let your wife lie about my sanity? When you stood there and watched her break me down piece by piece?" He didn't answer. Because there wasn't one. He left quietly. Michelle, on the other hand, screamed. She threw a vase, slammed cabinets, packed in rage. But I didn't respond. Matey. Listened to the old gospel songs Walter used to love. And waited for peace to return. But on the night before the move-out deadline, something happened. Something I didn't expect. I heard the front door slam and the screech of tires. Then silence. I walked outside. David's car was gone. But the boys were still sitting on the porch. Alone. To be continued. If your heart just dropped, you're not alone. What kind of parents abandon their children in anger? Next chapter is going to reveal the true depth of this betrayal. And Grandma's greatest test yet. Like, comment, and subscribe so you don't miss it. Grandma's journey isn't over. It's only just beginning. The porch light flickered above me as I stepped outside, robe tied tight, heart thudding louder than the cicadas in the trees. The boys, my grandsons, sat there in silence, backpacks at their feet, blank stares on their faces. Not a single tear between them, but the kind of stillness that only comes after a storm too big for children to understand. I blinked. "Where are your parents?" They didn't answer at first. Then Tyler, the youngest, barely 10 years old, said in a voice flat and hollow, "Mom said we'd be better off staying here, until she figures things out." My legs nearly gave out. I reached for the railing, gripping it like it was the only thing keeping me upright. They left them. They actually left them. Michelle and David had driven away, in a flurry of pride and rage, and left their 2 boys on my porch without a plan, without clothes, without even a goodbye. Did they say where they were going? I asked gently, kneeling down beside them. Tyler shook his head. They were yelling in the car. "Mom said you ruined everything." I took a slow, deep breath. These were children. Innocent. Caught in a crossfire they never asked for. Abandoned like trash bags on a curb because their parents couldn't face the consequences of their cruelty. I pulled them both into my arms. That night, I made 2 pallets in the living room with warm blankets and the softest pillows I could find. I boiled tea, made hot chocolate, and found an old VHS tape of The Lion King. We sat and watched in silence, the 3 of us, while I cradled the weight of 2 generations. And when they finally fell asleep, curled against me like they had when they were toddlers, I sat there in the flickering light of the TV, wondering how a son I raised with my own hands could grow into a man who would walk away from his own children. The next morning I called Nancy. She answered groggily. "Martha? What's wrong?" "They left them," I whispered. She went quiet. "You mean left like, for work?" "No," I said, my voice trembling. "They're gone." Nancy didn't hesitate. "I'm on my way." By noon she was in my living room reviewing everything. She brought forms, guardianship documents, affidavits, copies of Michelle and David's court records. Within hours, we had submitted a petition for emergency custody of the boys. 2 days later I stood in court again. But this time not to defend myself. This time to protect. The judge reviewed our case quickly. Michelle and David couldn't even be contacted. Their phones were disconnected. They'd vanished. Left the city, maybe even the state. And so, the judge looked down at me, then at the boys seated behind me, quiet and scared. "Mrs. Weller," she said, "do you feel capable of taking custody of your grandsons?" I stood tall. "I may be 78, Your Honor, but I've spent my whole life taking care of others. I can take care of them too." She nodded. "Emergency guardianship granted." I walked out of that courthouse holding their hands. But my heart, it was heavy. Because while I had won the legal battles, the war had left scars. Deep ones. That night, the boys helped me move their things into the spare room. I pulled out old sheets, dusted off the bookshelf, and found Walter's toolkit so we could fix the broken drawer. It felt like life was rebuilding itself, one drawer and one heartbeat at a time. But there was more. The next week the phone rang. Unknown number. Answered. Martha. It was David. His voice was tired, broken. Where are you? Asked coldly. Doesn't matter, he muttered. I just called to say, we're not coming back. I sat down slowly. You left your children. He exhaled shakily. We couldn't handle it anymore. Michelle said. She said it was you or us. You chose yourselves over them. No, he whispered. I chose nothing. I don't know who I am anymore. Closed my eyes. They're okay. They're safe. But they cry at night. I'm sorry, Mom. His voice cracked. But I didn't have anything left to give him. Not pity. Not forgiveness. Not right now. I hope one day you'll come back a man worthy of them, I said, then hung up. And for a moment I allowed myself to cry. Not for me, but for the child I raised who became a stranger. In the days that followed, I started adjusting to a new routine. Mornings were filled with cereal and homework checks. Afternoons with cartoon shows and backyard soccer. I was tired. Oh, so tired. My knees ached. My back screamed. But my soul, it felt alive again. Neighbors began stopping by. Some brought toys. Others brought casseroles. But one afternoon, a woman knocked at the door I didn't recognize. She was short with soft eyes and kind hands. I'm from social services, she said. We received an anonymous tip about children being left in unsafe hands. My blood ran cold. Another trap. Another attack. I have full guardianship, I said, voice firm. You can see the papers. She nodded. That's fine, ma'am. But we still have to assess the home. I let her in. She looked around, took notes, asked the boys questions. Tyler clung to my side. Then she said something that made me stop breathing. We also received notice that Michelle and David applied for custody. In another state. What? They claim you abducted the children. My knees buckled. But I didn't fall. 'Cause I had truth on my side. To be continued. If you're reading this with a lump in your throat, you're not alone. Next chapter will uncover how far a desperate pair of parents will go, and how one grandma stands firm like a lioness. Please like, comment, and subscribe. The fight for family isn't over yet. The word abduction rang in my ears long after the social worker left. I sat on the edge of the couch, fingers laced so tightly they'd gone pale, my heart thudding like a war drum. Tyler sat on the rug playing with a toy truck, and James was at the kitchen table, drawing quietly. They didn't know. They couldn't. Not yet. But I did. David and Michelle had crossed the final line. They were accusing me, of kidnapping. Never mind the legal guardianship. Never mind the abandonment. Never mind the bruises they'd left behind. Not on the skin, but in the silence, the fear, the questions that lived in those boys' eyes. They were trying to take them back. Not out of love, but out of control. Called Nancy immediately. They filed where? She demanded. Missouri, I said, the paper still shaking in my hands. They must have driven there after the hearing. Nancy cursed under her breath. They're shopping for a state to side with them. But this isn't over, Martha. You have court records. Video, witnesses. Let them throw mud. We'll bring the truth. But they're saying I abducted my own grandchildren. I've seen this before, she said calmly. People lose power and they get desperate. They want to flip the story to look like the victim. Let's make sure no one believes that story. Over the next week, Nancy and I worked around the clock. She filed a restraining order. She contacted the judge from the guardianship hearing to notify the court of the cross-state interference. We had character letters from neighbors, teachers, the pastor, even Dr. Gray. I thought I was too old for war. But I discovered something about myself in those sleepless nights. I was a fortress. And I would not fall. On the fourth night after the accusation, there was a knock at the door. It was the police. 2 officers. My stomach dropped. "Ma'am," one said gently, "we received an out-of-state notice requesting a welfare check and possible child recovery." I nodded slowly. "You're just doing your job." I invited them in. Sat the boys down on the couch with me. I pulled out the guardianship papers, the custody documents, the court order. I explained the abandonment, the court testimonies, the official audio and records. The officers listened. They nodded. They looked around. And when they were done, one of them bent down to Tyler and asked, "You feel safe here, son?" Tyler looked up at me, then back at him. He nodded. "Grandma makes me pancakes on Saturdays." The officer smiled. They left without saying another word. I stood in the doorway for a long time after they drove off, the porch light glowing faintly behind me. The next morning, Nancy called with an update. "They've been denied emergency custody in Missouri," she said. "The judge reviewed the records and refused to hear the case. He called it an act of bad faith." I didn't cry. I just sat down on the porch steps and watched the sunrise. For the first time in a long time, I felt peace settle in my bones. But just when I thought the storm had passed, another wave rolled in. David emailed me. A long rambling letter. Not angry. Not threatening. Just broken. I don't know who I am anymore. I let her poison everything. I stopped standing up for you. I let you carry burdens I should have taken from your shoulders. And now I've lost my boys. I don't expect you to forgive me. But I want you to know, if you ever let me come back, I'll come back different. I'll come back as a son worthy of your name. I sat with that letter for hours. I wanted to throw it away. But I couldn't. Because beneath all the betrayal, all the wounds, all the silence, he was still my son. And I had loved him since the first moment I saw his heartbeat on an ultrasound screen. But love is not the same as permission. So I replied with a letter of my own. "David, I don't hate you. I never will. But love is not blind. And motherhood is not martyrdom. I will raise your sons with love and dignity, as I tried to raise you. But this home is no longer your refuge until you become the kind of man who protects instead of disappears." The door isn't closed. But the lock has changed. 2 days later, something unexpected happened. A box arrived at the door. Inside was my cane. Polished. Wrapped in blue silk. No note. But I knew who it came from. I held it in my hands for a long time, the wood still warm from the sun. That night, I walked out onto the porch with Tyler and James, holding the cane like a scepter. We watched fireflies dance across the lawn. Tyler looked up at me. "Grandma, are we gonna stay here forever?" I smiled softly. "As long as we're together, that's all the forever we need." But just as I began to feel like the fight was truly over, my phone buzzed. Voicemail. From a blocked number. Press play. Michelle's voice. "You may think you've won. But the boys aren't yours. They're mine. And one day I'll take back what you stole." Froze. Because this wasn't over. Not yet. To be continued. If your heart aches for grandma but your fists are clenched for justice, hold on. Next chapter will bring the final confrontation, the one no court can prevent. Like, comment, and subscribe so you don't miss what happens when strength meets motherhood. This war ends soon. Michelle's voice echoed in my mind long after the voicemail ended. "One day, I'll take back what you stole." I sat there in the dark, the glow of the phone screen lighting my face. The boys were fast asleep, their small rhythmic breaths rising and falling under their quilts. I didn't want them to see me shaken. But inside my stomach churned. It wasn't just a threat. It was a promise. I knew Michelle too well. That tone, measured, venomous, meant she wasn't finished. And knowing her, she wouldn't come through the courts again. She'd come through the cracks. Nancy called me the next morning after I forwarded her the voicemail. "She can't win," she said. "She already lost in court." "But the courts don't watch you while you sleep," I whispered. That afternoon I went to the police station and filed a report. Officer Daniels, the one who'd handled the welfare check, sat across from me again. "You've got every right to be concerned, Mrs. Weller," he said gently. "If she shows up here, do not open the door. Call us immediately." I upgraded the locks that night, installed cameras. Nancy helped me set up motion sensors, and even called a non-profit that offers elder protective services. They arranged for check-ins, and even got us a caseworker to monitor things weekly. But the damage was already done. I started sleeping with the cane by my bed again, not just for balance, for defense. And for the next few weeks, everything seemed too quiet. The boys adjusted surprisingly well. I enrolled them in a local school. Tyler made a friend named Miles, and James joined the art club. Our days found rhythm again. Pancakes on Saturdays, homework at the table, gospel music on Sunday mornings. But I kept one eye open, always. Until one Wednesday, just after dinner, the front gate creaked. I hadn't heard it in days. "Stay here," I told the boys, grabbing my cane and stepping outside. The sun had just dipped below the trees. The porch light flickered on, casting a soft halo over the gravel path. She was standing there, hair disheveled, sharp, a duffel bag slung over her shoulder like a threat. "You can call the police," she said before I even opened my mouth. "But I'll be gone before they get here." "What do you want?" I asked coldly. She stepped closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "My children." I didn't move. "You don't get to leave them behind and come back with a suitcase and a sob story." "I didn't come to cry," she snapped. "I came to remind you they're mine." "No," I said, fire rising in my chest. "They're not. Not anymore." She exhaled hard, lips trembling with rage. "You tricked David. You played us both. You neglected your children. You mocked me. You tried to have me declared insane. You lost, Michelle." She stepped closer to the steps, eyes glinting. "You really think you're going to win? You're old. You'll die soon. And when you do, they'll go to foster care." That's when I snapped. I took one step forward and jabbed my cane into the wood of the porch, the crack echoing like a gavel. "When I die, this house, this land, everything here will go into a trust for those boys, and those boys alone. You will never see a cent. You will never hold them again. And you will never hurt them." She stood frozen, then laughed, bitter and wild. "You think they'll thank you. You think when they're older they won't hate you for tearing their family apart. They saw who tore this family apart, Michelle," I said. "And it wasn't me." She opened her mouth to speak again, but that's when the cruiser lights lit up the driveway. Officer Daniels stepped out. Michelle cursed under her breath. "You called the cops." "No," I said, calmly folding my arms. "But the camera did." She turned to run, but the officer was already at her side. "You're trespassing, ma'am." She didn't resist, just dropped her bag and let them guide her to the car. As she passed me, she hissed, "You'll regret this." I stared at her as they drove away. "No," I whispered. "You will." I went back inside, heart pounding, limbs shaking, every breath laced with adrenaline. The boys met me at the door. "Was it her?" Tyler asked. He nodded. "She's gone," I said. "She won't be back." James looked up at me, quiet and serious. "Can we still live here forever?" I crouched and wrapped them both in my arms. "As long as you want," I said softly. That night, I sat on the porch long after they fell asleep. And for the first time in months I cried. Not from fear, but from relief. And from grief. Because even when you win, there's still pain. Even when justice is served, you still carry the weight of the wounds. But I wasn't broken. I was simply older, wiser, and stronger than I'd ever been. But just as I was about to head back inside, I noticed something strange on the mailbox. An envelope. No stamp. Just my name, Grandma, in childlike handwriting. I opened it carefully. Inside was a drawing. 2 stick figures, me and the boys, holding hands under a house with the word home scribbled above. I pressed the paper to my heart and closed my eyes. But then, I flipped it over. In the corner, written in a different hand, "We'll be back. E." To be continued. If you felt that in your chest, the love, the fear, the final stand, then don't miss the next chapter. The last chapter. The ending Grandma chooses, not the one the world gave her. Like, comment, and subscribe. This story is about to end with the strength of generations. I sat in the rocking chair, the stick figure drawing clutched tightly in my hand, the word home staring back at me like a challenge. On the back, the scrawled note, "We'll be back." Signed only with D. David. Closed my eyes. The wind rustled through the trees like whispers of all the versions of me I'd buried over the years. The quiet mother, the grieving widow, the ignored grandmother. But this version, the one who stood her ground, who fought for her dignity, who protected those boys like a lioness, this version of me refused to be silenced. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning I packed a small bag and left the boys with Nancy. I didn't tell them where I was going. Just kissed their foreheads and told them, "Grandma's got to finish something." Then I drove. I had a name and a hint from Officer Daniels, who said David had been spotted in a neighboring county. He wasn't hiding very well. A cheap motel off a dusty road. When I knocked, the door creaked open. David stood there, unshaven, eyes bloodshot, like he hadn't slept in days. He didn't speak. He stepped aside and let me in. The room smelled like beer and reheated pizza. Clothes were tossed across the bed. There was a photograph of the boys taped to the cracked mirror. "I didn't write that note to scare you," he said softly. I wanted to come back. But I didn't know how. I sat down in the only clean chair. "You left your sons, David. You walked away from them and from me. And now you want what exactly?" "Redemption." He looked down. "A chance. You had a chance," I snapped. "You had a life. I gave you everything I had. And when I needed you to protect me, you sided with her." "I know," he whispered. "I hate myself for it." I looked at him. Really looked. And for the first time in a long time I didn't see a monster. I saw a broken man. A scared little boy who had grown into someone too weak to carry the weight of love. "I didn't come here to fight," I said. "I came to tell you something. I'm not afraid of you anymore. Or Michelle. I'm not afraid of being alone. Because I'm not alone. Those boys, you abandoned them. And I picked them up. And we made a life." He nodded, tears in his eyes. "I'm not coming back to live with you," he said. "I know I'm not ready. But I want to try again. Can I write them letters? Can I call? Just something." I stood up. "You can write. But I'll read every word first. You can call. But only when I say. You want back in their lives. You earn it. With consistency. With humility. With silence and service." He nodded, tears now streaming down his face. "I'll do whatever it takes." I turned to leave but paused at the door. "You said you didn't know how to come back. So I'll tell you how. You start by not disappearing again. You show up. Even when it hurts." Then I walked away. And this time I didn't cry. Because I hadn't come to make peace with David. I'd come to bury my need for him. That afternoon I drove home. The boys ran out to greet me, Tyler holding a drawing, James waving wildly from the porch. And for the first time the air felt lighter. Over the next few weeks, life settled into something beautiful. Letters arrived, one a week, from David. The boys read them cautiously at first, then with more curiosity. I helped them write replies. Short ones, just enough. Michelle never resurfaced. The police confirmed she'd been issued a permanent no-contact order. She had tried to appeal it and lost. Her silence was the greatest apology I'd ever receive. Months passed. The house bloomed with life. I planted tomatoes. The boys built a treehouse. Nancy came over every Friday for tea and cards. We laughed. We healed. One Sunday morning, I sat on the porch sipping coffee as Tyler climbed into my lap. "Grandma," he asked. "Yes, baby. Are you ever gonna leave us too?" I held him tighter. "Never," I said. "Even if I'm gone, I'll still be in the house. In the floors, the trees, the air. This place is our forever." He smiled and nodded like he believed me with his whole heart. And maybe he did. Because this house didn't just hold our bodies. Held our stories. Our survival. Our truth. Later that year I made one final trip downtown. I updated the trust. Not just for the house but for everything. Every savings bond, every antique, every last dollar tucked away in the folds of my life. I named Tyler and James as sole beneficiaries. And just before I left the attorney's office, I added one last clause. In the event of my passing, this house shall remain untouched by courts, relatives, or the whims of the world. It will stand as a sanctuary, where dignity cannot be stolen, where children are not abandoned, and where silence is never mistaken for weakness. I sign my name with steady hands. Martha Weller, nurse, widow, mother, and now, grandmother, protector and survivor. This is my story. They turned my bedroom into their laundry. So I bought the mortgage. They tried to silence me. So I became the storm. They left the boys. So I became their home. And in the end, I didn't just take back the house. Took back myself. Megaphone if this story moved you. If it reminded you of the quiet strength our elders carry, and the power of standing up for your dignity. Please like, comment and subscribe. Because every story deserves to be heard. Especially the ones whispered behind closed doors.